Iran is losing $500 million a day. This isn't an analyst's estimate. It isn't a research institute's projection. These are the words of the President of the United States, posted on an open social media platform for the whole world to read. Iranian military personnel aren't receiving their pay. The police aren't getting paid. And what has the regime done in the face of all this? It seized cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz, declared total control over the most strategic waterway on the planet, and announced to the world that it is still in charge. That isn't strength. Strength doesn't need to be announced. That is desperation in uniform. Let's establish the facts before any analysis, because this is exactly the kind of conflict where misinformation circulates in both directions, and where anyone watching without a filter will come away more confused than when they started. So here are the confirmed facts, with sources, without speculation. President Trump posted a direct statement on Truth Social on April 22nd. Iran is collapsing financially, wants the Strait of Hormuz opened immediately, is desperate for money, losing $500 million a day, with the military and police complaining that they aren't being paid. He used the expression SOS. This isn't third-party geopolitical analysis. It is the head of the U.S. executive branch describing the state of the adversary in real time, publicly. Second confirmed point. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, released an official video in the last 14 hours in which they stated verbatim that they are rearming, re-equipping, and adjusting tactics, techniques, and procedures during the ceasefire period. The message is unequivocal. They are not resting, they are preparing. Third confirmed point. Since the start of the U.S. blockade, U.S. forces have already redirected 28 vessels attempting to enter or leave Iranian ports. 28. Not 2, not 5. 28 ships that tried to break through the blockade and were sent back. One of them was hit in the engine room. What is still disputed, what we still lack full confirmation of, is the actual extent of the damage to the Iranian naval fleet, and how many of the submarines visible at the Bandar Abbas shipyard were effectively neutralized. But the confirmed numbers already say enough to understand what is happening. Now comes the part that the mainstream media isn't showing with the clarity it deserves. Everyone is covering the seizure of cargo ships as an act of Iranian power, as a demonstration that Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. And that narrative is wrong, not because it's a lie, but because it's incomplete in a way that changes everything. Here's what isn't being said. Iran has laid a suspected minefield in the Strait of Hormuz. So far, it seems defensive. It seems like a measure of territorial protection. But when you look at the exact position of this minefield on the map, it doesn't span the entire strait. It is positioned precisely where it forces ships to veer closer to the Iranian coast, in the exact direction where the Revolutionary Guard wants to intercept these vessels. It is not a defensive field. It is a hunting trap designed to direct commercial traffic into the range of the IRGC's speedboats. And why speedboats? Because that's all that's left. The Iranian Navy as a conventional combat force practically no longer exists. The large frigates have been sunk. The Soleimani-class ships, those designed to serve as drone carriers and helicopter landing platforms, have been neutralized. What Iran has operational today are hundreds of fast attack boats, small vessels built for speed, not sustained combat, hidden in the shipyards and docks of Bandar Abbas, the IRGC Navy's last operational stronghold. And to intercept an unarmed cargo ship weighing tens of thousands of tons, you don't need a frigate. You need 1 or 2 speedboats, speed, and the willingness to point a gun at the crew. That is exactly what happened today to 2 ships. They were boarded, threatened, and escorted to the port of Bandar Abbas. And a third ship, identified as the Euphoria in reports coming in now, was struck with enough force to be disabled. It is adrift. It cannot reach port. It cannot leave the region. It is simply floating off the Iranian coast in a state of real maritime peril. The Revolutionary Guard and Iranian state media have called all of this a routine enforcement of maritime safety rules. They said the ships were operating without authorization and posed a risk to the safety of navigation. Meanwhile, a commercial vessel is adrift in a potentially dangerous condition in the very strait they claim to control with total authority. The Pentagon has not issued a specific statement regarding the Euphoria as of the time of this recording. No one has explained why. The Western media has not asked either. This pattern is not new. The mechanism we are seeing unfold now has played out before in other contexts, with other actors, and the result has always been the same. In the United States of the 1930s and 1940s, when the federal government began to truly tighten the noose around mafia organizations, the response from those organizations was exactly what we are seeing now. Increasingly aggressive rhetoric, symbolic acts of force to show the world and their own members that they were still in control, attempts to use the legal system and the press against the very government that was pursuing them. And it didn't work. Not because the government was militarily superior, though it was, but because financial and institutional pressure was what broke the organizations from within, even before any direct confrontation. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates with a logic structurally identical to that of a mafia. They want power, and they want money. Money sustains power. Power guarantees money. It's a cycle that works as long as the coffers are full. When you take $500 million a day out of that cycle, what happens isn't an immediate surrender. What happens is that the leaders start pointing fingers at one another. It starts being their fault. Then it's the other's fault. Then each faction begins to calculate what's left for it if the regime falls, and what's left if the regime survives. And then the process of fragmentation begins to gain momentum of its own. There is also a historical irony that needs to be mentioned because it is disturbing in a way that sheds a lot of light on who this regime really is. For decades, Iran has funded, trained, and equipped the Houthi rebels in Yemen. For decades, it supported groups operating in the Gulf of Aden and off the coast of Somalia, groups whose primary and most lucrative tactic was precisely the seizure of commercial ships at sea, the kidnapping of crews, and the extortion of shipping companies and insurers. Iran was one of the financial architects of modern piracy in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea. And today, on April 22nd, Iran seized commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz and even declared that the United States is responsible for disrupting international maritime security. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes in a way that is sometimes hard to believe. Now, the layer that absolutely no one is discussing, and which is probably the most important of everything said so far. The U.S. blockade is not a purely military operation. It is an operation of engineering internal collapse. And Iranian leaders themselves are playing out this script in real time, without apparently realizing what they are revealing. When Iranian state media declared that the extension of the ceasefire is an American ploy to buy time and prepare a surprise attack, and when the regime's spokesperson said that the blockade is identical to a bombing campaign, they weren't sending a message to Washington. Washington already knows what it's doing. They were sending a message internally, to the IRGC commanders, to the Ayatollahs watching the coffers run dry, to the police officers not receiving their salaries and who need an explanation for why they continue to follow orders. The regime is in internal narrative control mode, not external negotiation mode, and that is a very specific sign of where the pressure is really being felt. At the same time, and this is what makes this entire analysis something that directly affects you, Reza Pahlavi has arrived in Berlin. Berlin is not a random geographical detail. It is the city where, in the months leading up to the start of the conflict, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in protests explicitly directed against the Revolutionary Guard, openly calling for regime change in Iran. Not reform, regime change. Pahlavi will meet with German lawmakers from across the political spectrum, speak to the press, and meet with members of the Iranian diaspora. This narrative is being built in parallel with the military conflict and the financial collapse. There is an Iran that is not this regime. There is a people who want to be free and who have representation in the world. And the reason why this matters to you, here, now, regardless of where you live, is this. The Strait of Hormuz is the passageway for approximately 20% of all the oil circulating in the world. Not 2%, not 5%, 20%. Every seized ship, every escalation in that strait, every day that uncertainty about the flow of oil increases, is a direct blow to the price per barrel on the international market. And that blow doesn't take months to reach the price of fuel at the pump near your home. It takes days. What happens in the Persian Gulf today is in your pocket next week. And the Western media is framing the seizure of the ships as a show of force, even as the U.S. president used the word SOS to describe the state of the regime that carried out the seizure. No one is explaining this contradiction. And contradictions of this magnitude rarely exist by accident. From here, there are three possible paths for this conflict, and each is more serious than the last. In the first scenario, the most restrained of the three, The financial pressure of the blockade continues to mount at a rate of $500 million per day. Internal fractures within the regime deepen, and some faction within the IRGC or the Iranian government calculates that a serious proposal for negotiation is better than the alternative. A deal is struck. The blockade is suspended. Iran emerges from the conflict economically weakened, with its navy destroyed, its missile infrastructure reduced, but with the regime still in existence in the form of some transitional government or under severe conditions. This is the best-case scenario, and even that is not good. In the second scenario, the IRGC decides that showing weakness internally is more dangerous than escalating the conflict with the U.S. Ship seizures continue. They may even increase. And then the United States responds with the assets that are positioned and ready right now as you watch this video. The Arleigh Burt-class destroyers, the backbone of the U.S. surface fleet, versatile, heavily armed, capable of projecting power over vast distances with precision. The P-8 Poseidons on extended maritime patrol missions over the Gulf, equipped with sophisticated radars, sonar, and electro-optical sensors, hunting down every fast attack boat that leaves Bandar Abbas. The RQ-4 Global Hawk and its naval variant, the MQ-4C Triton, which remain airborne for over 30 continuous hours, monitoring every vessel movement in the strait and along the Iranian coast and passing this intelligence in real time to the entire U.S. network. The Air Force's F-35As, the F-35Bs, taking off from the assault ships of the Marine Corps' expeditionary units, the F-35Cs, taking off from aircraft carriers. Three variants of the same platform, operating from three different types of platforms, all at the same time. The speedboats off Bandar Abbas begin to be destroyed. The conflict reignites. And this time, Iran no longer has the navy it had at the beginning. In the third scenario, which is what no one wants to say out loud, the regime cannot withstand the internal pressure and begins to fragment before any agreement is reached. With unpaid salaries, no unified command, and different IRGC factions calculating their own survival interests, the power vacuum in Iran creates instability that no regional actor, not Saudi Arabia, not Turkey, not even the United States itself, is prepared to absorb in an orderly manner. This is not peace. This is not a controlled transition. It is the kind of collapse that generates proxy conflicts, territorial disputes, and humanitarian crises that last for decades. None of these three scenarios has a clean outcome. None of them ends well for everyone. So we're back exactly where we started. $500 million a day. SOS. Said in public, by the President of the United States, as a fait accompli, not as a threat, not as a projection, as a description of the current state of a regime that today seized ships in a strait that controls 20% of the world's oil and declared that it is still in command. The question no one can answer today, the question that will define what happens in the coming weeks, is this. When a regime that operates like a mafia runs out of cash, when soldiers stop getting paid, when commanders start looking around calculating what's left for them, what does that regime do before it falls? There's no answer to that yet, but that's exactly what we'll be tracking every day. If you've made it this far and aren't subscribed yet, now is the time, because tomorrow this map will change again, and you'll want to be here when that happens.